Sorry about that. The camera cut out. 20-minute deadline. So you're not holding a stick. You're not about to club someone to death with the pen, just as a pen holder. And it's, again, with technique, it's all about the technique. And it takes time. An awful lot of it takes time. I can't even count how many steel nibs I've gone through in frustration, anger, how many holes I put in tabletops from jamming the pen point down into the tabletop because of frustrations, irritations, anger. You know, you can't erase ink, but you most certainly can tear it up. Tear up the piece of paper. Lots of trial and error. So, but again, it's don't grip the pen, hold the pen. Figure which way works best. Again, most people are taught in school to write like this. If that's a way that holding the pen works for you, that's great. But again, it's really less about holding the pen than it is not gripping the pen. You just hold the pen. You know, there are some instances where you know you do little things like this, or the dot work. A lot of the dot work requires you to grip the pen because it's about pressure. And that's with the technique thing, again, that's with holding the pen, not gripping the pen, holding the pen, and using the bottom half, you know, your wrist and your palm and your forearm to do most of the actual muscle work. That's the one thing too, is it's all about angle and pressure. Angle and pressure. So on a matter of tools, a lot of that has to do with availability. This is why I like these steel nibs. They're simple, they're inexpensive. This is a cheap wood dowel I got from Walmart. I used Gorilla Glue and glued it on there. With a little bit of tape for added grip. You can rest your finger on that. You know, sand it down to make it more comfortable. It's lightweight. Again, I've seen artists online and videos, they got these pen holders and then they're just mummified with this big huge like lump. And that's fine. That's great. I mean, if it works for them, it works for them. That's awesome. I find bulk in the handle to be I don't know. It's a difference between wearing shoes with memory foam and wearing moccasins. And moccasins, you can feel the ground under your shoes. With memory foam, it's just a cloud of air. You're just walking on clouds of air, but you don't really feel much of anything. But it's, again, the purpose of the thing. Memory foam soles are for comfort, and moccasins are just to keep from getting rocks poked through your toes. So, tools were available, pen points. This was found in Dad's old art box from his Luther College days. I Googled if I could find these, and I found a lot of some of them on Etsy. I haven't looked on eBay. I haven't bought anything on eBay forever. Yeah, but this is a box it came in. You can tell how old it is. What does it says? Speedball pens represent the most accurate way of lettering signs, posters, and creative letter forms. Obviously done before Photoshop or Illustrator, no doubt. Conventional pen point holder. I'm not a fan. They're uncomfortable and they're plasticky. And that's why I use old brush handles for pen holders. I have taken dowels and I've carved them down. It seems to do the job. I prefer these more than the plastic holders. And the other thing too, let's see. Sit. See, where, oh where are you tonight? There we go. Sit. So, different brushes have been cannibalized, and this Gorilla Glue. The pen points are cheap enough, and I don't destroy them as much as I used to in fits of rage. So the other thing, so in getting along line with the whole thing of tools. So I've had this pen for 15 years. I'll give you an example of some of the line work. A very fine line, and that's why I use this only on occasion and mostly for fine art drawing. I don't use it for comic book work because, again, with comic books, you're drawing on a larger format that gets shrunk down, and an awful lot of the detail that's found in here could find itself being lost in the process, lost in translation. And bringing that 15-year-old pen up is that so you'll have a whole box. You get a dozen of we'll use ballpoint pens. So you have a whole dozen of F301 zebra ballpoint pens. After using them, certain pens will develop certain characteristics because paper generally is relatively abrasive. It's not like sandpaper, but it is a little bit abrasive. So when we were kids, Mom always made our clothes. That shows you our economic standing way back in the good old days. And that was one of the things that Mom always got on us about, was not to use her fabric cutting shears for anything paper-wise. Because after a period of time, cutting paper with the shears she used for cutting fabric caused the shears to hang up on the fibers. So paper has an inherent abrasive quality. And with these 102 nibs, depending on what paper you use, will help you identify the characteristics each pen will eventually develop. I have some, and these are manufactured pens. They come off an assembly line. So this one will have a certain characteristic. And since this came off the same assembly line, theoretically, figuratively, as this one will have a different characteristic line-wise. Slightly thicker. And again, this is drawing from the side. I imagine the design of these is designed to be flat at an angle like that. Like that's how it's going to be. But, it's not completely at the side, but it's at like kind of a 3/4 turn. And that has a characteristic. And this will be slightly different. A slightly heavier line. And each pen develops its own specific characteristic. I have some that will only do thick lines. And they're the same pen tip. And that's one of the reasons why they're identified with different handles. So they're easily identified. The other thing too is choices of ink. And that varies greatly with availability. I use Dr. Martin's Bombay Black. That's been the best overall ink. Some ink is heavier, like an awful lot of the Sumi ink is really, really heavy and it flows really well, but it doesn't produce really that much of a fine line. There is some ink that's kind of watery, kind of thin, and it will, again, it depends on what kind of paper you use, will bleed or will produce very low contrast lines. They'll flow really well and they'll produce really fine lines, but they don't produce enough contrast. There was a bottle of Pelikan drawing ink that I used for years. It was some of the best ink that I used. It was at just about too thin, but with enough contrast. But the ink started to mold in the bottle, and I think the ink had been frozen and thawed enough that it was unusable. So, selection of pens, it depends on what you want to draw. You'll go through 5 or 6 points before you find one that works to your satisfaction. Paper is another thing. So this is Bristol. It'll have different characteristics to this, which is Strathmore drawing paper. It's thinner as opposed to this. This is Arches watercolor paper. It's really hard. It's a nice aggressive texture, but it allows for this really fine feathering. I think this was done with this pen. And again, back to this one. This is Canson watercolor paper. It doesn't have as aggressive a tooth as the arches, but there's enough texture in the paper that allows really fine feathering on the lines. And this one, I think, was this one. Time, technique, and tools. And different ink will have different characteristics between the pens and the paper. There's such a wide variety and variances between brands. So the Spear and the Stars, that paper, this Bristol, that is from Hobby Lobby. It's that Master Craft, Master Forest, Master Art, whatever, off-brand Bristol. It's softer, it absorbs faster than the Strathmore Bristol, and it's cold. It has a very cold tone to it. Whereas you put up against the Strathmore has a slight warm tone to it. The Strathmore doesn't soak as fast, but it also doesn't have the capacity to bleed, which the Hobby Lobby brand does. And this is Blick Art Supplies up in the Twin Cities. I got some of these pads. I think it's the sizing on the paper that prevents it from soaking the ink in. So you get these heavy lines. It takes a while for it to like soak into the paper, hence the little mess there. So I'll do more into these, not tutorials. But again, to anyone who inquires, practice, make mistakes, don't use pencil. Look at the mistakes you make. Mistakes are permanent on the paper. It doesn't mean they're going to be permanent when you do the next thing. Because that mistake, it's an anchor. It's a road sign. It's a mark that you've taken one little step forward, another little step forward. So be grateful for the mistakes, because the mistakes are showing a point forward, and it becomes the next point forward, the next mistake. So that's about what I got there. So anyway, thank you for watching, and have a good day.